Hello, statistics dummies out there. I'm Naomi.
I'm Kira.
And I'm Michelle.
The fact that you're watching this video right now indicates that you are seeking a simplified and understandable lesson in statistics. For today's lesson, we will show you how statistics is a math that's actually used and applicable in real life. Now, we will be teaching you under the topic of surveys, samples, and biases. For you visual learners out there and those who learn by example from others, you're in luck. Because to make this subject a bit more understandable and real life for you, we have gone out into the real world to test our own original survey. In the following lesson and video clips, we will provide examples of numerous sample types and biases that may occur when surveying. Instead of reading some boring old textbook out of a textbook, we will be allowing you to see with your own eyes the meaning of important vocabulary from simple random sample to voluntary response bias. No clue what that means? Well, don't sweat it. Just watch and learn.
What kinds of activities do the inhabitants of Roanoke Park, Katati, and Santa Rosa enjoy? In order to answer this question, we conducted a survey in which we asked random people in the community to answer this question.
Out of the following activities, which do you enjoy the most? Sports, reading, watching TV, cooking, shopping, being outside, or drawing?
Being outside.
Okay.
Hey, run.
I'd probably have to say being outside.
Being outside.
Watching TV.
Being outside.
Okay, thank you.
I'd have to say being outside.
Thank you. Shopping.
Watching TV.
And being outside. Is that
A population is the group of people you want to learn about. In our survey, our population would be the inhabitants of Roanoke Park, Katati, and Santa Rosa. A sample is a representative cross-section of the people used to better understand that population. A sample survey is a question or questions asked of a sample in attempts to extrapolate information for the entire population. The study we conducted was a sample survey.
It is the best defense against bias. When one randomizes, they are giving each individual and each person that is being sampled and surveyed a fair, random chance of selection.
Bias misrepresents a population by influencing the results. Common biases include, but are not limited to, relying on voluntary response, not covering enough of a subset of a people within the population, or using a leading question.
In sample size, it is the number of individuals of a sample. And what the sample size determines is how well the sample represents the whole population. For a model of a population parameter is simply the number given for this model. And we rarely ever know the true value of it, but we do hope to get a sort of estimate for this population parameter.
A statistic is any proportion, mean, or any value calculated from sample data. A sample statistic is any statistic that corresponds with a population parameter. A sample that accurately reflects an entire population is representative. A sampling frame includes all individuals who are used to make a sample. Sampling variability. No matter how carefully you conduct a survey, different samples will have different results. This is called sampling variability, and it's unavoidable. A representative sample is close enough to the actual population, but not exactly the same. Also, individual responses constantly change, depending on the day, location, and the individual's state of mind.
Now, census, it's pretty simple because it's just a sample that consists of the entire population.
A simple random sample is when a surveyor randomly selects individuals for the sample from the whole population. Each individual in the population has an equal chance of selection. When a population is divided into multiple levels and random samples are drawn from within each level of the population, this is called a stratified random sample. The individuals in a stratum are similar to each other, but different from individuals in different strata. We employed this method in our survey by dividing the population into the strata of male and female.
In order to make a cluster, you have to divide the population into subgroups that are randomly selected. Each group is a cluster, which should be very similar to the other groups and be representative of the entire population. In our survey, we grouped responses based on the location in which we surveyed people. For example, people who are at the local mall were in a different cluster than people who were at the local supermarket. But we can expect similar mix of people in each location.
A systematic sample is a sampling technique that it draws by selecting each individual systematically, such as when you have your sample or you have your population, you would say, I'm going to sample or survey every 5th person. So you see 5 people walk by, get the 5th one. Something like that. And you have to do the same number each time for it to be a systematic sample from your population.
A multi-stage sample is obtained by using any combination of sampling methods.
A voluntary response bias is a part of a non-response bias. And in this situation, you have a sample where an individual can choose whether or not to respond. And the samples are based on this voluntary response. They're always invalid and you can never recover them. So no matter how large sample size, you have that situation.
Excuse me, sir. Could you answer a question for us for a survey?
No!
Do you want to answer too? No? Okay.
Okay.
A convenient sample is one in which the surveyor chooses people who are easy to survey. This kind of survey is unlikely to be representative because it usually focuses on a specific subgroup of the population instead of the entire population as a whole. In our example, we interviewed a group of our friends. This isn't representative of the general population because it excludes anyone who is younger or older than teenagers. Since these teens are from the same friend group, they are also more likely to share the same activities.
Drawing. Being outside. Being outside. Shopping.
Undercoverage is a bias based upon the failure to fully represent all groups proportionately to their representation in the population. For example, if our population is a high school, if we represent seniors more, with few freshmen and no sophomores and no juniors, freshmen, sophomores, and juniors are undercovered.
Non-response bias. A bias is introduced to a sample, and the majority of the sample do not respond. For those that do respond, they are most likely not representative of the whole entire sample. For example, if one were to go survey at a grocery store in the middle of the week during work and school hours, you would most likely just get old people and stay-at-home moms. So, thus, that would not include the entire population.
What do you want?
We're doing a project. Can we ask you questions?
A response bias occurs anytime a surveyor intentionally or unintentionally leads the respondent to or away from an answer. The most common response bias is when the wording of a question creates an emotional response, which may change the respondent's answer. In our example, we used negative description words to deter respondents from choosing sports, being outside, reading, and watching TV. As a result, a higher percentage of people chose cooking than when we worded the question in a neutral way.
Which do you enjoy the most? Playing intense sports, sitting inside reading, being a couch potato, cooking, shopping, being outside on hot days, or drawing?
Well, I like drawing, cooking. So those two, out of them, all of them, probably cooking.
Okay. And then cooking?
What did we learn from our sample? Well, when we asked in a neutral way what they enjoyed the most, 35% of people living in the Roanoke Park, Kitati, and Santa Rosa area answered with being outside, the most popular answer. However, when we made the question biased by changing the option being outside to being outside on hot days, the percentage dropped to 0.05%. The percentage who preferred cooking increased from 0.03% in the non-biased survey to 27% in the biased sample.
No survey is perfect. So, some factors that may have influenced our results were that our sample sizes differed day to day, small sample sizes, people's changing moods, time of day, and of course, weather conditions. For example, the fact that we surveyed on nice days may be associated with our high rate of people who chose being outside. Please note that due to the many factors that may influence our results, we can only gain a general estimate of the public's opinion rather than exact results.
Thank you for watching.
We hope you didn't bore you too much.
I hope you dummies out there now know how to conduct some surveys.
Surveying is a lot more difficult than you would think it to be.
There's a lot of awkward situations that can arise.
While we were surveying people, we had trouble trying to get responses from people. Oftentimes, people would just keep walking and ignore our question. Others would just avoid eye contact.
And sometimes they only knew Spanish.
Yeah, kind of a problem.
So, in order to combat that,
we included a no reply response, which just meant that the person didn't reply to our answer in one of the options.
another problem that we ran into while we were surveying is that apparently you're not supposed to stand outside of Oliver's and ask people questions for a survey unless you reserved a space there. We actually had a security guard tell us actually very nicely that we had to leave in half an hour. So I would recommend to any of you trying to conduct a survey in the future to plan ahead that way and try and let people know at the place where you're going to survey.
And Target apparently has a no soliciting sign.
Yeah.
So you can get kicked out.
Yeah, not Target. Another thing to remember is that sometimes people feel uncomfortable when you ask them questions, even if it's for a survey, and so you have to remember that people have the right not to respond.
For example, when we were surveying in downtown Santa Rosa, one gentleman actually didn't believe that we were asking for a project. He wanted us to prove that we were high school students, and we actually had to prove that we had a project about surveying. So keep that in mind.
What part of the surveying process stood out the most for you?
Well, I think for me, what definitely surprised me was how even though we try to avoid biases and like we want to create a certain bias in this situation, it always somehow turns out that a bias happens no matter what you do. When you decide, oh, I'm going to take a survey here at Starbucks, it's like, well, already you're setting up a bias for certain people there, and the time of day that you're surveying gives a bias because whether people are at work or not, and like the type of people that go to coffee shops, and it's like biases seem to be very natural whether you want it to happen or not, and they're very hard to avoid.
So the main part of surveying is that you actually have to accept that no matter what you do as humans, there will be some form of bias. And the main key note to it is that you have to identify your bias and make sure that the person who's trying to understand your data understands what your bias is so that they can better understand like what you're trying to get across is real or not real. I feel like our project was relatively successful because
We were relatively able to isolate each of the biases that would influence our results.
However, if we had more time and funding, we could probably have avoided some more of the biases that we ended up having in our results.